You ever hear an argument that just seems to twist logic into a pretzel to justify something that feels, well, forbidden? Today, we're going to break down a really fascinating piece of reasoning that does exactly that. We're diving into how someone tries to make a deeply contradictory act sound perfectly reasonable.
Okay, let's jump right in. This is the statement at the very heart of what we're looking at. And right away, it throws us into this huge contradiction, right? A total lack of love smashed right up against an act of incredible physical intimacy. The rest of what we're looking at is all about trying to square that circle.
All right, so to even begin to untangle this logic, we've got to start with the facts. Before we get into all the justification and the emotional chaos, let's just establish the one thing we know for sure happened: the physical act itself. So this is our ground zero, the core action that everything else is built around. A physical act happens between two friends. It's simple, it's direct, and it's the foundation for the really complex justification that's about to come. Okay, so we've got the physical act down. Simple enough. But this is where things start to get really messy, because as soon as the source layers on the emotional reality, the tension just skyrockets. See, the source doesn't just describe what happened, it gives us the emotional backdrop. And what's so wild is that the context it provides seems to completely clash with the act itself. It's defined by these two major complications. And here they are, plain as day. First, there's an explicit, stated lack of love between these two friends. And second, there's a pre-existing commitment. Someone is already in a relationship. Each one of these points makes justifying what they did a whole lot harder. And this just lays it all out so clearly, doesn't it? On one side, you've got this act of physical intimacy that usually implies some kind of emotional connection. And on the other side, you've got the stated reality, no feelings involved, and a commitment to someone else. The two columns are just completely at war with each other. So we have an act that seems to just fly in the face of the emotional reality. The central question of this whole explainer is, how in the world does the source even attempt to justify this? How does it try to reconcile these two opposing ideas? And let's just be super clear about what we mean by justified here. It's not about making the act morally right or wrong. It's about the attempt to make it seem reasonable or logical within its own bizarre framework. We're really looking at the art of rationalization. So how do they do it? How is this case for reasonableness actually built? Well, this is where the argument takes a really fascinating, completely counterintuitive turn. The logic it uses is probably not at all what you're expecting. I mean, this is just remarkable. The argument doesn't hide from the lack of love. It doesn't try to explain it away or sweep it under the rug. No, it weaponizes it. The lack of love becomes the very first reason for the justification. It's presented not as a problem to be overcome, but as the reason the act is permissible in the first place. And then, as if that wasn't strange enough, the whole thing pivots to this really odd comparison, likening the act to the totally impersonal experience of watching porn. The goal here seems to be to devalue the act, to strip it of any intimacy and reframe it as purely transactional, something without emotion. The logic is, if love isn't required there, why is it required here? So, if we break it down, the justification is basically a three-step move. First, you openly admit there's no love. Then, you try to reframe the entire act as something devoid of any emotional meaning. And finally, you hammer that point home by comparing it to a totally impersonal experience, trying to neutralize all the moral and emotional stakes. So, there you have it. That's the logic the source presents. But just because we've taken it apart doesn't mean we're left with a tidy answer. In fact, it's the opposite. This whole fragment leaves us with one giant lingering puzzle. And this is really the question it forces us to confront, isn't it? Can you truly justify an action by just detaching it from all the emotional and relational context? Is it logically sound to ignore the human element, especially when there are existing commitments involved? This justification certainly tries to. And that's exactly where the source leaves us. It offers a justification, but it provides no definitive answer. It presents a logical path, but it's up to us to decide if that path leads to a reasonable conclusion or if it's just a clever and convenient dead end. What do you think?